All right, let's dive into the incredibly high-stakes world of international diplomacy. Today, we're looking at a force that's powerful, often invisible, but absolutely crucial: momentum. We're going to explore how this one secret ingredient can mean the difference between a historic peace treaty and a total collapse.
So, have you ever wondered about this? I mean, take the Uruguay round of global trade talks. They kicked off in 1986 and didn't finish until 1994. 8 years. But then you see other unbelievably complex deals get hammered out in weeks, sometimes even days. So, what's the deal? Why the huge difference?
Well, the answer really comes down to this idea of diplomatic momentum. Think of it like the current in a river. When it's flowing strong, the negotiation moves forward. It feels like progress is inevitable, and you find your way around obstacles. But when that current dies down, the whole thing can just get stuck in the mud and fall apart. So, what happens when that forward motion just stops? When talks hit what diplomats call a lull, it's not just some harmless pause. It's actually a moment of extreme danger for the entire process. Yeah, a diplomatic lull isn't just everyone taking a long coffee break. The real fear here is that it can become permanent. Without a real conscious effort to get the engine started again, the talks can just wither and die, creating the perfect opening for the whole negotiation to collapse. The first big risk is all about the people. When there's no progress in sight, the negotiators themselves, and just as critical, their supporters back home, they start to lose hope. That energy, that optimism you absolutely need for creative solutions, it just evaporates. And you know who loves a good stall? The people who never wanted the deal in the first place. A stall gives them the perfect ammunition. They can go to the press and say, "See, we told you so, this was never going to work." And that creates enormous political pressure to just walk away. And this might be the most fatal danger of them all. The world is a chaotic place, right? When one negotiation stalls, another crisis is always waiting to pop up and demand attention. That's exactly what happened to those Uruguay trade talks. In 1991, the Gulf War exploded, and suddenly, the attention of the world's top leaders was pulled somewhere else entirely.
Okay, so knowing all those dangers, what can a diplomat actually do? How do you create momentum, or how do you get it back once it's lost? Well, one of the most powerful tools in the entire playbook is the strategic use of time, specifically the power of a good deadline.
And there are basically three flavors of deadlines. First, you have your self-imposed ones, where the negotiators themselves agree on a date. These are okay, but their big weakness is you can always agree to extend them, which is exactly what we saw happen over and over with Brexit and the Iran nuclear talks. Then you've got external deadlines, things like a US presidential election. These are way stronger because you can't just move them. And finally, you have symbolic deadlines, tied to dates that mean something politically or emotionally, which are perfect for grabbing everyone's attention. But here's the secret sauce. The real holy grail, the most powerful kind of deadline, is when you can get different types to overlap. When you have self-imposed, external, and symbolic pressures all converging on the exact same date, the urgency becomes almost impossible to ignore. The Good Friday Agreement is the absolute classic example of this. The talks had a hugely powerful symbolic deadline, the start of Easter weekend, a time for peace and new beginnings. But they also had a very real, very practical external deadline. Everyone knew an agreement had to be reached before Northern Ireland's tense summer marching season began. That combination of hope and fear is what really forced a breakthrough.
All right, so playing with the clock is one thing, but diplomats also have these more psychological tools to shape the story and create a feeling that progress is just inevitable. This next part is all about the power of words, publicity, and people.
Now, this is fascinating. The very language, the words you choose to describe a negotiation, can actually build momentum. By framing the talks as a physical journey of some kind, diplomats create this powerful expectation of forward motion and an eventual destination. I mean, just listen to this quote from former Secretary of State James Baker. He told the Palestinians, "The train was moving and they'd better not miss it." Wow, that is a masterclass in pressure. The image of a train says progress is happening, the track is already laid out, and getting off isn't just a bad idea, it's dangerous. It totally reframes the choice from should we agree to can we really afford to be left behind?
And the train is just one of many in the playbook. You hear about roadmaps to peace, which suggests a well-planned journey. You hear about entering the tunnel for those final intense talks, like with Brexit,
Or you can frame it as a race against time, which cleverly turns your opponents into partners, all working together against a common enemy, the clock.
Okay, now we usually think that secrecy is everything in diplomacy, right? And a lot of times it is. But when you use it strategically, publicity can be an incredibly powerful tool for pushing the talks forward.
This can work in a few different ways. For one, a leader can totally go over the heads of other officials and appeal directly to the public. That's what Anwar Sadat did with his historic trip to Jerusalem. You can also talk up the talks, project an image of success to make it politically toxic for anyone to be the one to back out. And finally, you can frame anyone who gets in the way as a wrecker so that nobody wants to be seen as the person who destroyed the chance for peace.
But what if the negotiators are trying their best, but they've just hit a brick wall? Not because they're failing, but because they literally don't have the authority to make the huge compromises needed for a breakthrough. Well, that's when you deploy the final tool. You bring in the bosses.
And you can do this in a few ways. You can officially raise the talks from the ambassador level to the foreign minister level. If that's not enough, you can call a full-on presidential summit like Jimmy Carter did at Camp David, which brings the maximum possible authority and media pressure to bear. Or you can use a back channel, a secret line of communication that lets the top leaders talk directly, cutting through all the red tape.
So you've got deadlines, narrative framing, and bringing in the heavy hitters. It might sound like a pretty straightforward playbook, right? But the true art of diplomacy isn't just knowing these tools exist. It's the judgment, the instinct, to know exactly when and how to use each one.
So this is it, really. This is the momentum toolkit. Powerful deadlines, metaphors of movement, strategic publicity, and raising the level of the talks. Each one of these is designed to fight against that stall, to create that sense of urgency, and to make a deal feel not just possible, but inevitable.
But here's the most important takeaway. None of these are magic bullets. The wrong tool used at the wrong time can absolutely backfire and make things even worse. In the end, it all comes down to a diplomat's political judgment, their gut feeling, their ability to read the room and pick the exact right instrument to get things moving again.
And that leaves us with one final and really critical question. All of these tools we've talked about, they're designed to speed things up, to force a conclusion. But what's the risk? In that mad dash to get an agreement, do you sometimes sacrifice the chance to get the right one? It's a trade-off that sits right at the very heart of modern diplomacy.